as I begin to kind of talk a little bit more about the nature of my personal belief system, I want to talk a little bit more about epistemology, or the philosophy of how we know what we know, what we can consider to be knowledge, what we can construe as evidence, uh, that type of information, and how we can process it in a way that makes sense, is relevant, and is real. I use the definition of knowledge, which means justified true belief, which means it's a belief reinforced with observed phenomenon that happen within the world as far as we can see it, and has been proven to be true multiple times over and over and over again, usually either by experimentation or by the nature of repetition, such as I can know, in quotation marks, that the sun is going to come up tomorrow because over the 27 odd years of my life, the sun has routinely come up on my side of the hemisphere. So it is safe for me to say that I know the sun's going to come up tomorrow. Whether or not the sun actually does come up tomorrow, is another thing. But that's my knowledge because, as I've mentioned before in inductive reasoning, just because the propensity of evidence seems to suggest event A doesn't necessarily mean that event A will occur 100% of the time. And that's one of the lines in the sand that I want to draw, is that, philosophically, you can argue that no one can really know anything, which is why, unfortunately, we have to deal with such thoughts as solipsism, and as a result, we have to we have to infer a certain sense of uncertainty with every statement that we make. For example, we can state that within the base 10 system, 2 plus 2 does actually equal 4, but it's based on a definition that we've accepted to be real and pertinent in reality for the sake of practical measurement. So, in fact, our concept of knowledge is a working practical assumption about the nature of reality. As a result, returning back to my previous podcast talking about the closed cylinder experiment in which the individual is not subjugated to any sort of sensory input or output, and thus we reach the problem of knowledge. How does one know anything to be true? How does one begin to develop conclusions to it? And I talked a little bit about this in the previous podcasts I've had, but I wanted to touch upon this as we branch into epistemology and as we slowly start determining, well, what can we consider to be true? What can we consider to be earnest? And what can we consider to be relevant? As I continue these podcasts and as I expand upon my own belief systems and how I can justify them based on our understanding of what knowledge is and what we can interpret to be the truth. Now, I want to return to my definition of knowledge as justified true belief while introducing an individual called Edmund Gettier. He's an American philosopher who took head-on the concept of justified true belief as knowledge in his 1963 paper called, well, oddly enough, is justified true belief knowledge. In the article, I'm going to paraphrase quite a bit because it gets kind of technical and works a lot with symbolic logic, which I did not cover in my previous podcast. Maybe I'll cover that later on. He proposes two specific scenarios where he judges an individual's understanding of the world based on three criterion, which is called justification, truth, and belief. Justification is he loosely I'm loosely paraphrasing it once again, is his rationalization of the observed phenomenon. Truth, which he develops as like an objective outside of the person's consciousness understanding of what is. Like, for example, using the law of identity, a washing machine is a washing machine and cannot not be a washing machine. And the justification of that washing machine being a washing machine is because of the fact that the individual is able to observe the phenomenon, is able to interact with the washing machine, is able to develop his understanding of the washing machine and how it functions because he's able to directly interact with the experience of washing machineness. And belief, which is he develops a belief and understanding of how the machine works, and because of the fact that he sees the washing machine in the room, he can touch it, he can feel it. Therefore, that feeds into his justification of his fostering of the belief that the washing machine does indeed exist because he's able to interact with it. Now, Gettier's issue comes in the form of a two-case statement, as he begins to challenge that concept of what knowledge is and how we foster it. His first case is, oddly enough, called Case 1. In this particular case, the individual is introduced to a person called Smith, and himself and his friend Jones have applied for a particular job, but Smith was told by the company president that Jones will, in fact, win the job. Smith then combines his testimony with the observable evidence of there being 10 coins in Jones's pocket. As a result, he comes to the conclusion that because Jones happens to have those 10 coins in his pocket, he was selected for the job. Now, as you can see, there's a huge logical fallacy in here, because there's really this disassociated type of reference between 10 coins and employment. But we're going to continue with that. Gettier argues that his justification is actually pretty reasonable, according to Smith, because of the fact that he's able to observe the phenomenon, is able to notice a result, and thereby combine the phenomenon with the conclusion, and therefore realize that Jones was employed because of the fact that he had more coins in his pocket than Smith did. It's not a guess, it's not a wild speculation, it's just he sees this strange course of causality and concludes that it is a causality, not a correlation. Now the average viewer would be like, what, that's insane, like how are you correlating 10 coins with employment? That doesn't seem to make any sense. But as you can see, there is a train of logic that goes from the company president telling Smith that the job is being given to Jones. He notices that phenomenon. He notices that Jones is now more gainfully employed and is strengthened by the belief of that because of the fact that the company president has told him, therefore creating a strange form of tautology. Now, what happens when Smith gets the job and he finds that he has 10 coins in his pocket? Therefore, it continues to strengthen his belief in the fact that 10 coins has a direct correlation with his gainful employment, and in that, there is no evidence to prove him otherwise. As you can see, there may be a disassociation between the two events, and it seems to be logically unsound. Like, it doesn't seem to be a good line of reasoning. However, within the context of that particular argument, it is actually logically sound to state that the 10 coins may have a correlation with his employment. But the real interesting thing comes from the fact that we know that there's something funny about that, but we can't explain why that line of reasoning is wrong when we take into all consideration everything. It seems pretty reasonable to conclude that. So that's the point of his particular thought experiment, is the fact that we know things are wrong, yet sometimes we can't really tell why they're wrong. So he's challenging the concept of how we justify what we know and how we perceive the world through our descent towards Smith's conclusion. And in fact, if Smith's line of reasoning is wrong, then the concept of knowledge as justified true belief is wrong. And if then that's wrong, then how do we determine what knowledge is? Well, we know we don't draw conclusions from the void. Well, at least no reasonable sane person would. You have a series of observable phenomenon that you see on a daily basis. You tend to develop reasonable conclusions based on the patterns that you witness within the world in which you live, and as a result, you start to develop an understanding of what is real and what is false. So I wanted to show two particular thought experiments. One, the Gettier problems, and two, the cylinder experiment, to show the spectra of how the problems with how we understand what knowledge is, and why epistemology is such a gigantic field of philosophic study. Anyways, this is Zoob, hopefully giving you something to think about, and once again encouraging you to think for yourself. Signing off.